Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to today's IEEE USA webinar, Diversifying Your Consulting Practice for Times of Crisis, presented by Jacob Beningo, Daryl Gerke, and William Kassenbaum. Before we begin, we'll have our presenters introduce themselves, starting with Jacob.
Hi, I'm Jacob Beningo. Welcome to today's webinar. I am the 2020 AICN Coordinating Committee Chair, and I'm also a embedded software consultant. So I've been consulting currently. I started my consulting practice back in 2009. So I've been doing this now for 11 years, and this is actually my 8th full-time year that I am in the process of doing this. So I started out moonlighting as a consultant, and then moved into full-time consulting about 8 years ago. So, with that introduction, why don't I let Daryl introduce himself as well?
Okay, thank you, Jacob. Hi, I'm Daryl Gerke with Kimmel Gerke Associates. Excuse me, we're consulting. I'm the surviving partner of Kimmel Gerke Associates. My business partner passed away 5 years ago. We specialize in electromagnetic interference consulting and training, although I'm now limited pretty much to training. The business was founded in 1987. And the first full-time day in business was the day the market crashed. So I've been through some of these disasters before. I'm always fond of saying the first day in business was the worst day of business. We got it all the way right away. So I do have websites listed here. One is emiguru.com. That's my engineering website. The other is jumptoconsulting.com. That's a blog that I've been doing for the past 10 years after I've been repeatedly asked by people, how do I get into this consulting business? So you're welcome to join that as well. And I will turn it over at this time to Will Kassenbaum.
Hello, I'm Will Kassenbaum. I've been around in this committee for many, many years. So we've been involved in trying to build up the consultants networks and all that for many years. And I spent about 10 years of my career with the DoD, and then a couple of years with other defense contractors, Hughes and Raytheon. And then since then, about the last 20 years, I've been involved in not only in consulting, but in a number of startups. I think it's 10 or 11 now. Many of those I've created, but some I've participated in. And currently, I'm operating 4 different companies, principally Kassenbaum Engineering, which is my principal consulting company, but also the Kassenbaum Group, Family Time Games, which is a game store, and a company called Energia, involved with energy systems. Go ahead.
All right, let's move on to the next slide then, and we'll get started here. So a couple of things, we're going to be talking about quite a few things today, as you obviously know from having seen the abstract that we put out for today's webinar. But we're going to be talking about how you diversify your offerings as a consultant, some of the different options that there are. And we're also going to be talking about a lot of marketing strategies and tactics that you can use, all based from the 3 of our experiences. So, we all have different ranges of experience, work in slightly different fields. And we've been at this for a fair amount of time, some of us more than others, and we have a lot of experience to share with you. So we're going to try to help you understand how to diversify yourself and survive different different crises. I mean, one obvious one people are very aware of right now is when you have a global pandemic. But there's lots of other types of crises that we can face, whether it's financial or health or an industry falling out from under our feet, maybe a secure job that suddenly disappears, and you're trying to figure out how to start up a consulting business or practice. So lots of different opportunities just in regular day life where you can potentially run into a crisis, even though it may not be global in scope. So with that in mind, let's move on to the next slide, and I will share with you a little bit about kind of the we have quite a few people attending today, so I don't know where you're currently at in your in starting your consulting practice. But let me give you a little bit of a kind of a background of how things typically end up going for consultants. So, and this can work for general business as well. So you end up starting, you end up at some point something kicks you off to start a business or a consulting practice. For me, I was a lead engineer at a really cool startup, and back in 2009, financial crisis hits. I had built a really good team and kind of discovered that even though we were in a financial crisis and the company failed, we actually probably should have still been able to succeed. There were some things that were, at least in my opinion, that could have been done in the business that could have really smoothed things out. And I thought, man, we invested years, built this great team. I never want to be in a position again where I'm not in control of, my own fate. I want to, I'm going to go start and be a consultant, share my experiences, and try to help businesses from a consulting standpoint. And this was probably, looking back, maybe a little bit on the brash side of things, considering I was probably 27 or 28 years old at the time. So I was really pretty green as far as engineering experience goes. But I said, this is what I'm going to do. I started that up. So, 2009, and like I mentioned, by 2011, at 30 years old, I had, was officially full time in a consulting career. So what ends up happening is you kind of start up, and usually it can be slow growth, ramp up potentially. But at some point you really start to grow. You start to figure out how consulting works. You maybe get really good in your field, or you already are. You hit some level of maturity, and then with any business, and I think with any consultant's career, what you find is that you start to enter into some type of decline, and that decline, like I mentioned, could be there's several different causes for a decline in a business. The first one is that we can potentially have an industry recession. So, for example, I started off consulting in the defense industry, and defense was just going strong. Had lots of clients in defense, and then after a couple of years, all of a sudden, defense contracts just went out of went out of style, I guess you could say. The industry had a pullback. There weren't any opportunities, and suddenly, there I was as a consultant with no work. So that's an example. If you're working in just a single industry, that could be a point of potential business decline. The second area is that you could have a client who goes out of business. So as I kind of mentioned before, you may have a client, you might have a single client, or maybe just 2 or 3 clients who make up your whole consulting business. And if one of them is 40% of your income, and they go out of business, or something changes with the business where they no longer need your services, oh my goodness, suddenly you could have a dramatic crisis from your consulting standpoint. A third one is that you could have just a simple failure to market. I'm going to talk here in a little bit, but marketing is very important for consultants. We have to be out there networking and marketing our skills, showing the value that we bring to our potential clients. And if we get busy with something, then we could find ourselves in a situation where we're not actually marketing our skills, not sharing our value, and that can lead to an eventual decline in the business as well. Another area that we could consider here, the fourth one, is going to be global forces. I think a lot of us over the last several months have seen how global forces can affect a business, whether it's a pandemic or whether it's a war or You can kind of pick whatever might be your favorite, I guess, and hopefully global crises aren't any of our favorites. But there's global forces that can affect it. I mean, maybe a shortage of oil, or a shortage of some resource, and it makes it so that, or an abundance of a specific resource, could drive changes in the actual industry that you might be working in. And then finally, there could be personal reasons. As I kind of mentioned before, maybe you have financial or health or family, or some type of event that happens that then can potentially affect the way that your consulting practice goes. So if we move on to the next slide here, I'm going to talk about some of the crises, just to give you an idea that I've ran into so far in my own career, and one that I see a lot of other consultants eventually run into, and that's this area, this area where we end up getting driven to, we start to get a lot of business. We go through, and we're working hard as a consultant. We get our first projects. Things are going good. Maybe we're doing some marketing while we're doing this, but then all of a sudden we get a big push from the client, right? At some point, every client always wants things done faster than it's actually humanly possible, or they want the laws of physics to change in order to make some device easier to build and manufacture or design. And what ends up happening here is eventually you kind of get the blinders on, right? You start to say, oh man, this client needs this. This is the deadline. Oh, I got to lock down, and for the next month, I need to work 60 hours a week or whatever, and just focus on them. And while you start to do that, you might get the job done and you deliver successfully for the client, but you run into a very big potential issue here, and that's that you haven't lined up your next project. So if we take a look here at this next image here on the slide, lining up your next project, you always have to be thinking about the next, not just the next project, but the project after that next one while you're currently working on your current project. And what this does here is it kind of sets up a process of understanding that specifically, depending on the industry you're in and what your skill set is, you may find that lining up your next project is going to change, or how you do it is going to potentially change the methods that you use. But you're going to find that you really need to be setting aside some time during any project you're working on to be able to start lining up the next ones. And that could be something as simple as making sure that twice a week you reach out and you network with people and see how they're doing and see if there's anything you can help them with. It could be anywhere from, I do a lot of blogging and white papers and things. So I make sure every morning I start out for anywhere from 1 to 2 hours, depending on the day. I'll sit down and I'll write some blogs. Sometimes it's for a periodical. Sometimes it's for my own website. Sometimes it's a white paper for a client, things like that. But I always try to start off doing something that's going to act as marketing material for the business. And then I'll also make sure I reach out to people on LinkedIn, check in with past clients, see how things are going, see if there's anything they need help with. But every single day I'm doing something marketing related. Because for me, I found it generally takes, if I have an empty pipeline, it generally takes 3 to 5 months to start to generate new projects. So if I go through and just focus on the projects I'm on, which I discovered early in my career, what ends up happening is suddenly you work hard, you get your project done, and then I've got 3 to 5 months potentially sitting around just essentially begging people or running super hard trying to fill the gap of I need a project so that I can actually have some revenue. Now, if we take a look at the next slide here, what this ends up doing for us as consultants, a lot of us end up in kind of this cyclical area where we have kind of a feast and then a famine. So we end up with a feast, a famine. And you can see here, this is kind of an example of what you might see in a consultant's career, where you do a whole bunch of marketing, you get people lined up, you start delivering projects, and you probably forget maybe about the first opportunity, about doing your marketing, because you get, again, those blinders on, and then suddenly, oops, now I'm in a famine. Then maybe you get your marketing back under control, you start to focus on it. You do a good job. You start to get to a point where, hey, you're getting a ton of business, things are going good, and then maybe you have an industry you're working in, it drops out. Or like I mentioned before, maybe a client goes out of business or they no longer need your services. And suddenly you see this, these drops and these peaks and these troughs. So what we're trying to do here, you could look at those famine periods as potential crises. And as we mentioned, they're caused by many different reasons. But the idea here is to try to find a way to consistently smooth this out. And for some of us, this might be diversifying the actual offerings that we have, that we offer to our clients. It may be that we work across multiple industries, or it could be that, we just look at different revenue streams and ways to generate revenue. So if you take a look here at the next slide, what you'll find here, the very first thing that a lot of us consultants do is we generate revenue by contract jobs. So what this basically means is, and this is how I started my consulting career, is I basically moonlighted to where I had a full-time job, and then I took on side jobs, and that was just contracting. And basically, it's kind of like having a job, or in most cases, it's like having 3 or 4 jobs. So instead of having one person telling you what you have to deliver, you suddenly have 4 different things you have to deliver for 4 different people, and maybe you're doing it on an hourly basis. So it's a lot like having a job. So this can kind of be, as I kind of normally say, is it's a way to bridge the gap between being being an employee and starting your consulting career. The next skill, or the next thing that you could potentially offer, is advisory skills, or advisory services. So one of the things that I've been doing a lot with my clients is I offer advice. They can hire me on retainer. I'll give them technical advice. I'll review what it is they're doing. I'll provide them feedback. I may help guide them through some specific problem that they have. I may just be on retainer where, hey, maybe once a week they call me, or we set up a occasional periodic thing. But the idea here is that advisory services tend to be a way where you do a retainer based on the time, not like a lawyer retainer, where you say, hey, give me $10,000, and every time you call me, I'll deduct, every 15 minutes, I'll deduct some little portion. But the idea is that as an advisor, you're offering your skills and your knowledge to somebody over some period of time, and they pay you a sum up front, and then over the course of some period of time, they utilize your skills and your knowledge, and you're available to them to leverage. And then when that time period is over, it expires. So that's kind of the idea behind advisory skills. It can be very high value to clients. The next thing that we can look at for us consultants is also coaching. You can offer coaching to clients. That's a little bit different, where maybe they have a very specific problem that they have. Maybe they need to improve their development processes, and they need they need agile process improvements for their software, as an example. And you're going to coach the team for 90 days in order to improve the way in which they actually develop their software. That's one example. Another one that we could look at here is going to be that we can also look at offering training. Daryl mentioned earlier that he's involved in training within EMC. As an embedded software engineer, I also offer training, except I'm offering it for people who are looking to develop embedded software. So if they're using real-time operating systems or they're developing IoT devices, things like that. So there's different areas where I look at the skill sets I have and I say, well, where can I help people? Well, I can help them with software architecture. So I look and say, well, I can offer training in that area. And that becomes a potential revenue source then for me. And as you start to add some of these up, if you have one area that this goes away, it makes it easier for a different area to potentially pick up and catch up from a financial side, those other areas. So another example could be you could mentor people. I've had several clients where they've said, hey, I've got a lead engineer and, he's struggling with this, and that. Over the next 2 months or, 6 months, can you work with him and mentor him to help him improve and get up to speed on something? And I've done that, as well. And again, you schedule a couple of meetings here and there. They reach out to you when they have problems or questions. It ends up being a pretty good way to generate revenue on the side from doing something like contract or actual development work. Now, another thing we can keep in mind for different ways to generate revenue is you can create your own products. So you can think of ways to, you could make engineering widgets, but you could also create, training type products or self-paced courses. It kind of blends, the idea there, but you create some type of products based around what your skill set is, and you offer that then to potential clients or other developers and engineers and things like that. You can also consider speaking. For example, you might say, hey, I'm going to go and, speak at conferences, or maybe I'm going to speak at, be a speaker that goes and talks at different company events and share some type of experience. So that's an option. We can also go through, we can do writing. One way that I do a lot of marketing, but also generate some small amount of revenue, is I actually do a lot of writing. So I'll do technical content for companies. I'll do technical content for media companies, things like that, where I'm writing about embedded software, my experiences, and getting my name out there. And at the same time, I'm also making a little bit of revenue for the time that's invested in sharing that knowledge with other developers. So it ends up being, I think, expert witnessing is also the last one that we could consider. So that's another useful way for you to potentially generate revenue. Usually with expert witnessing, you can charge a lot per hour, $300, $400, $500, $600. I've heard people, but you do have to have a personality where you can handle the contentiousness of the legal system and the way that whole system behaves. Okay, so if we move on to the next slide here, just to give you guys an idea, what the idea behind this is that having multiple revenue streams and diversifying your business offerings. As you can see here, I showed an example of what a consultant's revenue might look like. And you can see here on the left-hand side here, this might be an example of what it looks like when a consultant first starts off, right? He's making, in this case, using design income to try to generate revenue. And, maybe during that first famine period, the consultant realizes, oh man, I need to do more than just offer one specific type of service. So maybe they start trying out different things, offering multiple types. And you can see over time, instead of being solely dependent upon maybe one industry and just design income, you start to see mixes of different types of offerings, whether it's, pure consulting or technical marketing or writing or, doing advisory work, trying to generate revenue via products. So you can see here, as you look over time, you still see kind of, feast, I guess you could call feasting and famine type periods. But notice that over time, the famines are a lot, not as deep. And, the feasts start, kind of rising over time. So, using multiple revenue streams in this way, when crises come, at least from a financial standpoint, this can help you kind of ride out those crises. Now, one of the things we also have to make sure that we're doing, if we move on to the next slide here, is that you want to make sure that as you try to figure out these different product offerings and how to diversify your consulting career, you want to figure out who your actual buyers are. So who is it that you can provide value to? And this could be maybe other engineers, maybe it's product managers, it could be directors, CTOs, maybe it's actual CTOs or CEOs. And if you're into expert witnessing, it might be that your customer may actually be attorneys. So you kind of have to start spending some time and thinking about different types of products you can offer, different areas you can share your value in, and then who are the people that are actually going to rely on that particular value. So, and then if we move to the next slide here, what I'll try to do here before I move on and we hand things over to Daryl is I just want to leave you with a couple of best practices that you can think through for diversifying what you offer your customers and your clients. So one, you want to make sure that you market your skills across multiple industries. So as I mentioned, I started out in the defense industry. It's still kind of one of the areas that is, I guess you could say near and dear to my heart. Although I prefer to work a lot in space systems and on projects where things actually fly. But at the same time, those types of projects don't always come along. So I also work in medical. I work in industrial. I work in consumer electronic devices. So there's a wide range of markets I'll take my skills and market them across. You want to make sure you have multiple types of buyers who understand your value. So maybe you're targeting CTOs and just project managers and not other engineers, or maybe you really are marketing to other engineers. You want to make sure you're constantly networking. As I mentioned, make sure 2-3 times a day you're reaching out to people. A good way to network is obviously through IEEE. There's lots of events through IEEE, although your buyers may or may not be there. And if your buyers aren't within IEEE, then you have to figure out what type of events they are going to so you can also be there as well. You may also want to try to share your knowledge and expertise through online blogs, white papers, things like that, and then market those to your target audience in order to, again, kind of get your skill sets out there quite a bit, and then make sure that you're periodically brainstorming and launching new offerings. I typically every year will probably try to launch 2 or 3 new types of offerings or 2 or 3 new types of products, and I'm constantly rehashing and trying to innovate and figure out new ways to generate revenue for my consulting practice. So, and by doing that, what I've been able to do is kind of very much smooth out my revenue stream, so that instead of having these crazy spikes and ups and downs and feasts and famines, it still happens. There's periods where there's a lot going on, but a lot of times the famine periods are more controlled, and that I'm the one who says, no, I'm cutting back here now for a while to recharge and kind of regather myself and figure out what direction I want to go, and then then drive the next cycle of business. So, all right, so that's kind of my background and some of the things of how I think about diversifying my consulting practice. I'd like to hand things over to Daryl now, who will share with you some ideas on his side as well.
Thank you. And actually, I consider musing about this. You and I share probably 100% of the same philosophy. Oh, got it. It wasn't mine. Anyway, so I think we're definitely on the same page, but over some of the same ground. And I would just echo everything that Joseph has said. After 33 years as a consultant and about 50 plus years actually in engineering, I've had my shares of ups and downs. Start off with 2 layoffs, one less than 2 years out of school. And I already mentioned that the first day in the consulting practice, the market crashed. We like to think that we didn't cause the market to crash, but it was definitely a scary day, but we did survive. And it seems like these ups and downs come about once every decade. So I've been through this before, and what I'd like to do is just share some thoughts, some quick thoughts with you on that. My main point here is not to panic. It's okay, maybe for a moment, but don't panic. A pilot once told me, he said, it's okay to be scared, but it's not okay to panic. And so I think that's good advice. I like that. So the thing is, we'll put on your consultant's thinking cap and figure this out. My presentation is going to actually cover 2 parts here. One is kind of a quick method for kind of sorting this out, a little model I call ACT, means become aware, critique, and try. And then we'll also give you a quick case study of the first big bump in the road we ran in our consulting business after being 5 years in business. We thought we had it all figured out. So again, don't panic, put on your consultant's thinking cap, start figuring out alternate plans. This is what we do as consultants. We solve problems. So it's first thing to do is assess where you are, and then start making some plans. Can I have the next slide, please? Next slide. Thank you. First of all, take stock of your finances, because this is probably the most important thing. It is a business after all. And so you might look what your burn rate is, and you ask yourself, how long can I last? What are there expenses you can trim? Are there savings or other sources of income? So it's if you're living hand to mouth, this might not work. I actually had this happen the first time I jumped into consulting. I only had about 3 months of savings there that I spent on it. I'd come off of a layoff. This is not the time to start a consulting business when you're coming off a layoff. So I went back into the corporate womb and then reassessed. But a couple of years later, I was able to make the jump. So anyway, but look at your past and current source of income. Are there potential areas that you might not have pursued? This was very key to this example I'm going to give a little later on. And then consider your options. Is it time to pivot? That's a very popular term nowadays. Or is it time to crawl back into the corporate womb? And there's nothing wrong with crawling back into the corporate womb. I've had colleagues in this business that have done that numerous times. They've consulted for a while, then they've gone back into the corporate business, and then they come back out and everything. So it's there's no shame, no harm, no foul on doing that. The next slide, please. So I'm going to give you a simple little model here for pivoting. It's what we call ACT. I don't know where I picked this up. It was many, many years ago, but it served me well over my career. This is when you're assessing something like this, there's 3 steps here. Act, aware, become aware. And then you critique, you sort things out, and then you try. That's the key thing, is you actually take some action. This is where a lot of us fall down as engineers. It's analysis paralysis. But to go back to aware, it's time for creative ideas. If you want to brainstorm, mind maps, anything, just getting the juices flowing. Nothing is too far out or impractical at this point in time. And just, like I say, get yourself thinking, what could I do? Maybe I could flip burgers. I don't know. But then you start to critique things and sort things out and focus. And my suggestion is to pick not more than 3 of the best ideas, maybe even 2. You probably don't want to just settle with 1, but pick a couple of them. And then don't overcomplicate them. Keep it simple. And then advance ahead there. So then it's time for action. This is no time to crawl into a hole. Hey, the house is on fire. Grab a bucket or a hose now. So, and I see people sometimes getting paralyzed with this, and it's just, you need to move on very, very quickly. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a real world example, and this happened to us in 1992. We went from about 80 hours a month to, we were each billing about 80 hours a month, and we went to a total of 8 between the 2 of us for the 4th quarter of 1992. And it just stopped. We asked ourselves, where did the parade go? What happened? Now, there's a little background here. We were riding 2 waves. Like Joseph, we were very involved with defense because that was our main background, but we were also doing a lot of work with personal computers. Both came to a screeching halt in 1992. We also had 2 major clients. We had a test laboratory and a training firm that were providing well over half of our business. The bottom line was we had too few eggs in too few baskets. So if I could have the next slide. So the analysis, the critique was we sat down and asked, where did the other business originate? I mean, it was obvious that these 2 main lines of business, these industries, were no longer viable for us. And one thing that stood out was medical devices. Now, at the time, both Bill Kimmel and I were located in Minneapolis, St. Paul, which is often known as Medical Alley. We had a number of small medical companies that we were working with, and some of the larger ones. And we stepped back and took a look at that. We said this market is underserved. It's certainly not as glamorous as PCs or defense at the time. Their core business was usually not electronics, and they were also highly regulated, so that provided a barrier to entry. A lot of people didn't want to work in the medical arena because of that. And so we asked ourselves, okay, how do we crack this nut? And we pivoted into the medical business. So if I could have the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. Okay, there we go. So what we did is we came up with a 3-part plan. And the first thing was we offered to write a column for a leading medical magazine. It was Medical Devices and Design for Industry, I believe. And we had already done a number of other articles. And again, like Joseph, we did a lot of writing and everything. So we'd already done articles. So we had the credibility and we knew that we could do it. So we just contacted the publishers and asked them if they would like a magazine on electromagnetic interference, which we weren't too sure they were going to be interested in because it was rather esoteric. But at the time, there was going to be a lot of interest within the community because the FDA had some rules, et cetera. And it was also being driven by developments in Europe with the requirements in Europe for the European Union. So the second thing we did was we joined an industry committee. Actually, just Bill joined the industry committee. It was the AMI, the Advanced for Medical Instrumentation, Association for Medical Instrumentation. And now we were a little concerned there, so we limited our participation because it was still very effective, but this could be a big time suck. And so we made clear up front that we couldn't provide a lot of support, but we'd be willing to provide support that we could at meetings. I think there were like 4 meetings a year. And that worked out well. That kind of, again, increased our credibility and visibility within this community. And then we already knew a number of personal contacts with the Food and Drug Administration, so simple phone calls helped that. And within 6 months, we had success in a new market niche. And we didn't have to wait. Other business started to come back as well, but it turned out it was rather fortuitous that we'd had this sudden drop because it forced us out of our comfort zone and into some new market areas. So if I could have the next slide, please. Now, to follow up with that, we ended up eventually writing a book on EMC and medical devices. That was actually the compilation of the articles, and we were actually approached by a publisher on that. It's amazing how this works. So we ended up writing a book. It was actually sold through the IEEE, and I'm not who else is selling it now, but it was a joint effort. It's been long enough ago that I don't get any royalties anymore, but it's out there. We also, with the publisher, they were doing trade shows, so we started doing little technical tutorial sessions at the trade shows. This again provided good exposure, and we also did a self-funded research project. And this was one where there were questions about what kind of electromagnetic fields are there in hospitals. I went to one of the IEEE EMC conferences, and there was a session on that, and everybody sat around and said, "Does anybody have any data to share?" So we decided to take it upon ourselves, and we contacted some of our clients. One of them was at the Mayo Clinic. The other was with the University of Minnesota Medical Center, and went in and did a detailed survey on this, published it. It became published through the publisher. And these three things really, really moved us forward as being the go-to guys, if you will, in the medical EMC arena. We knew it all worked one day when an FD engineer was asked at a meeting. He said, who do we need to contact? They said, call 1-800-Kimmel-Gerke. This actually precipitated our phone number. We have an 888 number, 888 EMI Guru, but that was precipitated by this off the cuff comment from the FDA engineer. But we knew that we had succeeded with our goals on that. So could I have the next slide, please? So I say rinse and repeat. We use this medical pivot to expand our portfolio. And like Jacob, we then later on expanded into industrial controls, vehicles. We've done planes, trains, and automobiles, facilities, telecom, and more. And we kind of use this same model. We would find we would find areas. Sometimes we would pick out a magazine that was the trade journal in that area. One thing we found with the EMC business is that 90% of what we do was applicable across every industry, but there was 10% that was unique. So part of the challenge was to learning what the 10% that was unique and what challenge we had to come there. For example, with medical, it's highly regulated. With automobiles and stuff, cost is the big driver. Industrial controls, of course, performance, etc. So anyway, we would kind of combine those and make that work. That also led us into the training business, and training turned out eventually to be about half of our revenue was coming from training, as people asked for it, and we could go on for a long time about that. We continued this way for the next 23 years until Kimmel passed away in 2015, and we were just absolutely having a blast as consultants. I would go back and do it again in a heartbeat. No longer consulting here, but I still do training, enough so that it's fun, but not enough that it seems like work. And part of the fun has been participating with the Consultants Network here and trying to do my best to help new consultants, young consultants, join in the fun. The final thought is when life gives you lemons, make lemonades. There's more. There's if you want to go to Jump to Consulting, there's a link there for a post that actually covers in a little more detail what we've discussed here. So I hope this has been helpful. And with that, I will hand it off to Will.
Okay, next slide. There we go. Well, my discussion here to give you today is to talk about when in times of crisis and your revenue is dropped and you're sort of finding yourself looking out on an uncertain landscape going forward, this is a good time to step back and work on your business. So quite often, as Jacob put it, you find yourself heads down, working. Maybe you haven't done the marketing you need to do. Maybe you haven't, and all of a sudden, whoa, something big changed. So zombie apocalypse, and here we are. Or whatever it may be, as you'll encounter a number of things as you go through your careers. You've got to pivot, you've got to improve your marketing, you've got to improve your business here while you've got a little time to work on it and fix maybe even some of the things that you've been carrying along with you that might be deferred maintenance in your corporate aspect of life. And so I'm going to give you some tools to think about those specific things, and I'm going to give you some specific tips about that. So one of the key things, and as engineers, many of us have already thought about KPIs. Quite often, when we talk about key process indicators, we may be thinking about technical issues revolving around maybe a system we're controlling. But your business is a system also. And so in this case, there are many aspects of your business, whether it's a retail business or a consulting business or a product delivery business or a service or even any kind of business, where understanding what your key process indicators are and starting to really track them in a methodical way so that you can change things and you can see what happens. And I'm going to show you sort of how this works. Improving your business results with sales and marketing, improving your sales and marketing, your consistency, the administrative aspects of your business that might get out of control, and systematizing the key things that are part of your business. So anyway, soak in the example so you understand why you care, and then look at I'm going to give you some specific tools, but there's a plethora of different kinds of tools like this out there that you would want to investigate. Next slide, please. All right, so here's some examples. This is by no means a exhaustive list of KPIs, but on a business perspective, sort of a working on your business perspective, here are some things that you might want to start tracking. How many leads are you getting per month? If you're doing marketing, are you actually keeping track? Am I getting 5 leads a month? Am I getting 20 leads a month? How many am I getting? And these are, they're sort of a continuum, right? When we talk about leads, whether you're talking about, pure, you don't have any idea if they're really interested. We think about a lead turning into a prospect, you can give them an offer to the point where you can actually offer them something, to converting it to a sale. So what are your conversion rates from first contact to prospect to being able to provide a proposal? Then what is your closing rate on those proposals? Keep track of that. What does an average sale look like for you? Are you selling $10,000 levels of effort? Are you selling $20,000 levels of effort? What are you selling? Keep track of that, because this starts you thinking about, how do I upsell in each particular sale? Is there something I can do to increase the value of any given contract? Because, of course, the level of effort it takes to close every single one of them is substantial. And so if you can find a good way to explain the value to your customer of what you're presenting, it's a good moment to maybe, as we say in the retail business, upsell a little bit, add some things that create value, or maybe extend the length or life of the relationship over a longer period of time. It's not always about rates of pay, but it can be. You certainly want to track what your rate of pay is for the amount of effort you're putting in. Some projects will be hourly, but some may be fixed fee. So how much time did you actually put in for that value that you're getting? What is your average project length? How many sales are you making per month? How many, what are the dollars per sale? What is the dollar, how much dollars are you making per month? Track these things. What percentage of your projects are on budget or under budget or over budget from your perspective? What percentage of your projects are on time or under schedule or over schedule? If you start seeing a pattern where you're either missing budgets or missing schedules, maybe you understand, maybe you need to fix that. If you're involved in sort of a new area of business, maybe you expect them to be over budget and maybe over schedule. But this allows you to sort of track your maturity in certain aspects of your business. There's another important thing to think about, something called return on ad spend. So many of you, if you've been involved in digital marketing at all, you're sort of aware of this. So of course, it's going to differ for different businesses, but you probably like to see at least 3 to 5 times. But probably if you're involved in a service business, it's going to be higher than that, because your marketing isn't going to cost nearly as much as the value of many of your projects. So you might be 10, 20, 50 on your return on ad spend. But you also need to think, if you're buying tools, let's say you're involved in energy, let's say you're involved in doing power studies and that sort of thing. You have to buy some very expensive tools, CAD tools. Maybe any other kind of thing you're working on might be expensive CAD tools. Well, what are the investments you need to make to participate in a specific type of work? What is your return on that investment? Net operating income. What kind of income are you generating after all of your expenses per year, per month, per project, right? How many customers do you have? How many are long-term customers? We talk about in consulting about building a corral of repeat customers, because they may not give you business every year or every quarter, but they may come back periodically and fill up a couple of quarters. Well, you want to keep in touch with those and don't lose them. And you need to come to an understanding over some number of years, what is the long-term value of a customer to you? So that may help you understand the investment you make in developing a new customer, because you know that if you get a new customer, they're worth $50,000 to you over the next 3 years or something. And you may be able to sort of determine that. So anyway, these are just examples. I'm sort of trying to whet your appetite to think about in your business what all the things are specifically tuned to you that represent what your accomplishments are in terms of the business aspects. And you can use these metrics as you improve things in your business, automate things, or improve your tactics, or change the way you do things. Does it improve things or did it not? Right? Next slide, please. All right. So this is a very simple, maybe too simplistic an example, but I want to point this out to you. The KPIs that we talked about, they seems like a lot of little minutia, but the many of them also are interrelated. And what I've found is that the effect on the bottom line is not just sort of, change this by 5% and change that by 10%, and maybe you get, a 10% adjustment in your bottom line. It doesn't work that way. They multiply, right? So here's an example of, let's say your number of leads per month improved from 8 to 10, and your conversion rate improved, and turning those we're going to call those offers. Let's say you improved from 20 to 25%, right? Then the average sale value also increased just a little bit. So let's say previously you were getting eight sales, then at 20% of those you actually closed, and you got $10,000 contracts, so you got $16,000 from those. But let's say you got 10 instead of 8, and you closed 25% of them, and it's 11K, 27.5. That's it's not quite double, but that's a big jump. That's 170% jump in revenue. So I encourage you to realize that small adjustments, small improvements in many of these KPIs can result in a very large jump in revenue. And so if you start looking at these and understanding how to model them, which we are probably all good at analyzing, you can start to understand how little improvements in every aspect of your business can have a big adjustment ultimately at the bottom line. Next slide, please. All right, so the first area of the tools and tactics that I want to go through is the sales and marketing end. This is the end that quite often we neglect. So, and Jacob went over this too. Sometimes we don't realize it, but we don't quite know how to advertise. But advertising, and you've got to sort of figure this out, because people can't buy from you if they don't know you exist, right? So whether you place ads on Facebook or LinkedIn or Google, you need to do something in addition to your networking and all the other things to try to get some awareness and reminders. It needs to get in front of people's faces from time to time. If you haven't researched or haven't done ads on Facebook or LinkedIn or Google in the past, one thing to realize is that you have a lot of control over the demographics that the ads will appear to. So you could, for instance, we're all very technical people, so you could find people that have college degrees, that are, say, in the 45 to 60 age range, located in specific areas that have the industries that you want to participate in. You can do a lot of things like that to direct the ads and to the eyeballs that are more likely to be your customers. If you've already got a following, like maybe Jacob does in his stuff, you can actually tune the demographics to match your existing list. So you could include the list of people that are you already have, plus the ones that are like those people or the ones that are friends with those people, and this can result in some good following in those things. And there's another thing that you might want to take note of. There's a tool that I came across here, an entrepreneur here in Indianapolis, Indiana, called Connected. And this is a very interesting automation. Essentially what it does is it mines the second, third, and fourth connection rings, if you will, in LinkedIn to help you make direct connects to the people that match a certain demographic. So let's say you were looking for corporate managers or corporate functional, or VPs or CTOs or CIOs or CEOs that are in not in your first, but in your multiple rings out from that. So you can get first direct connections to them. And what it'll do is it'll try to establish a connection with them with sort of a template letter that's directed directly to them and get them involved in coming to see maybe something you've left for them to download and see. And then essentially what it does is if someone is interested, they will connect to you and you can start a conversation with them. And it's very effective. It has a very large hit rate in terms of getting to the ones that you're interested in getting to. And I'm going to say typically 20 to 25%. So that's much higher than a lot of the other ad rates. So you might want to check that out and tell Devin I sent you if you do so. But anyway, there's also, you need to collect an email list. You can do this either on your website, with a capture, join my email list if you can get them interested, maybe from some of your advertisements. You can use MailChimp as a good tool, but there's a whole bunch of tools that do the same sort of thing, Constant Contact and other things. Nothing's for free, sadly, but you need to track that advertising spend and understand what its return is in your business, the return on ad spend thing. And another thing that's useful, many of you probably are aware of already, there are tools like Calendly that allows you to set aside certain times of your day or week that you would take phone calls, and you can allow people who get to your link that you can put in your advertisements or maybe from your email or from your website or various things to schedule a call with you. Tuesday at 2:30 p.m. I'm going to talk to the guy from Raytheon or something. Okay, and if you can get your ads out to the people, this is a good way to make a direct connection with someone who has the ability to engage you. Very powerful. And then here's some what I'll call supercharge, advanced tactics that you can do. Since you need to outreach, you can also do things if you can find a mailing list of actual physical mail or email lists or whatever it may be of potential customers that you would involve in. So not just social media, but direct contacts. There are a number of tools like Direct Mail IO, which actually can work across not only the social media platforms, but physical mail and other things. And essentially you embed in these things either a phone number that's specific to that campaign or an email link or a web link that goes directly to a funnel related to this campaign. And so you can track the interactions all the way back to the exact message that you put out. And so you can track how functional was it? How much did it cost me? What is the number of clicks I got back through that? And there's zillions of tools like Direct Mail IO out there. And so they're changing all the time because of course everyone is madly trying to develop these kinds of software as a service products. And all of them understand that you are interested in return on ad spend. All of them understand that you want to understand your marketing campaigns. They all want to help you model what the value that you're receiving from paying for those tools are. And so look at directmail.io and look at some of the tools that are like that out there. I think you'll find that something like that could be very effective. If you want to do what no one else does and write a personal email, personal mail, actually send them a letter in a envelope or on a postcard or something like that. There are companies like Ballpoint Marketing, which actually will have a robot handwrite with a ballpoint pen on a card or on a letter for you. And you can give them the text, you could give them a mail merge, here, print these 37 of them, send them out, right? And then these guys will do it for you. I mean, so these are things that you can do. There's also, if you're having troubles answering the calls and you want someone to screen them for you, there are companies like Call Porter. I think Call Porter is actually doing this a lot for real estate companies, but they would probably do that for any company that's trying to do this kind of inbound vetting of the inbound callers. You're trying to figure out what they need. If it's someone that's worth engaging, essentially they do the first pass on it and hand it to you. So you might look for tools like Call Porter that can answer the phone if you're getting a lot of that sort of thing. All right, next slide. All right, so in the terms of customer service and workflow automation, these are some other things. Obviously, if you're doing marketing, things like this, one of the problems we always have is how much how do you keep track of all this? I have this trouble. I get so many things going on, I can't keep track of it all. So one of the things you need to do is think about your customer relationship managers. Many of us know what CRMs, maybe you've worked with them before, HubSpot or Salesforce, or there's, again, a zillion of these. Some of them have free initial levels. Some of them have, very low cost. And you can track, how good these are, but these will help you keep track of your leads, prospects, and customers and past customers, and help you follow up with messages and pointful contact to let them know that you're still thinking about them and they'll be thinking about you. If otherwise you sort of fade off and into antiquity and they won't remember you anymore. So here's another one, workflow automation. So many of us involved in small business, we don't really think about this very much because every new project is a new creative act, if you will. But maybe over your career, you realize there are certain stages of a project, or you may realize there are certain things you want to make sure you do, even if it's just following up with your customer on some kind of a periodic basis. Maybe you want to be able to make your workflows such a way that you can add in some support personnel to help you with some things around the edges, so you don't have to do them, right? This is a way to do that. You can implement something like Podio, and you can have workflows that keep track of all those things, and you can see that they are actually happening, so you don't lose track of them. Again, there's lots and lots of tools like this, but this kind of thing would help you implement those standard procedures that you want to see happen, and so they become automated instead of having to remember them every time and keep track of them. For many of us have been involved in project management and group management, and there's a number of great tools for that as well. If you're not using any, you might look at things like Trello and Slack. Trello is used a lot for programming projects, and the nice way that it works is that you can have, especially if you have a lot of engineers that essentially can pick up any task because they're all similar in character. It's a good way to do that kind of Scrum type of work, and Trello is particularly good for that. Slack is better probably for just keep tracking of all kinds of ad hoc topics around specific functions of the business, so that those teams can sort of have a dedicated messaging board that goes along with that. Even Podio, by the way, has the ability to keep track of all that sort of thing as well. Basecamp is a very interesting tool if you haven't ever tried Basecamp, but it sort of implements a lot of things of both Trello and Slack, and it allows you to have all those communications and keep all the work products and sort of artifacts around the projects and efforts that are going on, so that you keep all that context. So again, a lot of different tools like this in this area, but there's some you should try. All right, next slide. All right, and so I'll go through this real quick. So in administrative and business systemization, this is an important part because you find yourself stuck with this. If you don't do your bookkeeping regularly and all that, you end up with a big, bushel basket of receipts, and it's horrible. So, hopefully you already have bookkeeping handled, you have QuickBooks Online, or you have something like that you can use that you can keep everything well in hand that way. There's some tools that help, though. I find that, especially as a consultant, I need to track hours quite often, whether I'm doing it for directly billing, or whether I'm doing it to keep track of my internal costs, so I know whether I made money or not on that project. A tool like Harvest will help me do that. It'll help keep me track of the hours. It'll help me quote particular customers. It'll help me invoice those customers. And when I receive payment, I can mark off those payments. And all of these things synchronize with QuickBooks Online, so I don't have a separate activity to keep track of the accounts receivable that I'm working on. There's also a tool called Forecast that integrates with Harvest that allows you, if you have multiple people working, or maybe you're trying to schedule multiple projects that you're working on simultaneously, to make sure that you're time boxing those and giving them each some time. So you might say, well, Tuesdays and Thursdays I'm working on project A, but on Wednesdays and Fridays I'm working on project B, and then Mondays I'm doing my little internal project, whatever it might be. Forecast would help you keep track of what that is. And you can keep track of then how much time you're spending on which aspects of your business. In terms of accounts payable, there's a tool, if you haven't tried it, called bill.com. And this, especially if you have multiple people that are writing checks or involved in paying for things in your company with debit cards or other things like that, bill.com helps you to sanitize that. So different people can approve of expenses before they happen. And this tool can really grow with you. It's very powerful. And again, it hooks to QuickBooks Online, very helpful. If you're doing things, sometimes if you're getting contracts signed, I don't know how complicated your contracts may be, but you could look at using DocuSign. These days, everything virtual is very handy to be able to get things signed like this. Also, sometimes you need legal help, but as we all know, every time you pick up the phone to a lawyer, you get a house payment. So to avoid doing that, sometimes you just need a letter written, sometimes you have other things. For a company, anywhere between $25 and $35 a month or something, you can get a plan from Legal Shield, and you can get essentially unlimited number of questions asked. You can get an unlimited number of letters written for you for no additional charge. And if you need an attorney to do something specific for you, they'll find a specific attorney that can operate anywhere in the United States and do that specific task for you at like 25% off their regular rates. So it's kind of a helpful process. Next slide. And there we are. So I hope I've given you some suggestions, and maybe you've got some questions for any of us.
All right, folks, we have time for a few questions. Go ahead and ask them in the comment section, and we'll load them onto the screen for our presenters to answer. If you have a question for a specific presenter, please specify which presenter your question is directed towards as well.
I see a question from Jason. Should we answer? Jason asks, do you have any additional recommendations for networking and business development? Of course we do. And so I'll jump in, and the others may have this question also. There are, all across the country, there are the Alliance of IEEE Consultants Networks, local consulting networks. Some of these are operating virtually at the moment, obviously, but many of them have periodic meetings, and you can join and network with those groups, and you'll get a lot of people similar to us comparing notes. Networking is a huge, huge thing, so you should seek out sort of any opportunities you have to meet with birds of a feather or areas of interest. Meetups are another good one. Daryl or Jacob, do you have anything on those?
I'll jump in here on this. At the risk of sounding like I'm self-promoting, I would invite you to check out jumptoconsulting.com, and there's on the sidebar there's 20 ways to attract business. And for each little little essays and everything, so they give you some ideas. It's something we've tried every one of them over the years. So, and also through the AICN, I've got a webinar on getting into consulting that covers the same thing. This is the number one question that I get from people is, how do I get the business? And it's so feel free to check that out there. And I'll bow out there.
Yep, and I'll just add, make sure that you assign time in your calendar, and you kind of you treat it religiously almost. That during these time periods, on these days of the week, I'm going to make sure that I sit down and do some some development. And from a networking standpoint, I mean, you can use IEEE like was recommended. There's there is a consultant finder through Collaboratech that you can use to kind of get a profile and stuff. And there's also LinkedIn. LinkedIn I found has been a really great source to network with people, get new people in your network. And then if you're blogging and posting interesting content there, you can sometimes get your colleagues, for example, if you're, for example, if I post something, I might reach out to, half a dozen people I know or maybe more and say, hey, would you guys, like this and try to gain further exposure. And then that can potentially get to, again, your target audience or your potential buyers and catch their interest. So
I want to jump in on that with LinkedIn. I've got a colleague that gets virtually all his business through LinkedIn. He's very active in the EMC business, and he started a group with LinkedIn, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. And I think at last count, he's got over 3,000 people on that group there. And he says he doesn't really have to do much of anything else. He just works LinkedIn. Which I have not worked at that well. But I've had other avenues, much like what Jacob has done. But I think the key is pick one or two things, get out there, and as Jacob said, work it. I mean, that's the other thing. Don't pick up the latest new shiny object and then move on. You want to pick one or two things and work it. But LinkedIn is extremely effective. Had it been around when I was starting, I probably would have been jumping on that.
Jacob, take that.
Yeah, so that one definitely is up my alley. So the two embedded software related conferences that I found to be the most helpful for me, anyways, have been Embedded World, which is in Munich. No, it's not in Munich. It's in Nuremberg every year in February or March. And then I've also found the Embedded Systems Conference has been pretty helpful as well. So they're a little bit smaller scale now than they were maybe a decade ago, but those have been two really good conferences. And then a third one I find to be very useful is ARM TechCon, which kind of covers microcontrollers, microprocessors, and software all kind of under one roof.
All right, I'll take this one. Yeah. Do you really think stepping into a business, someone must put a great concern into the ROI? I think you must. And I don't necessarily think you want to spend months and years at it, but you need to at least have the back of the envelope fully understood. What I tend to do is I create what I call a cash operating plan. And it's essentially the first 3 years of an operating budget, kitchen table budget. What are all my expenses to do this? Do I have cost of tools? What is it going to cost me for insurance and attorneys and whatever else it might seem to be? And I've got to sort of, make some pessimistic assessments of what I think the revenue will be, as well as about the what the potential costs could be. I mean, the whole thing's got to hang together. Otherwise, you may find that you leap out to do something and just get started, and then it's a disaster because you lose money on every single instance. So, and of course, it depends on what the business is. There's a lot of different businesses. So, there's a statement that said usually about real estate, but I think it applies to any business. Quite often, the deal is made at the front end. Business is not supposed to be a risk. It's supposed to be a sure thing. And the problem is that there are so many risks in terms of business, things that don't go the way you expect or don't turn out as good or the way you intended, that even if you have something nailed down and it's an absolute sure thing, it still actually is pretty risky. And we all sort of I think, understand that. So the goal is to figure out something that you can do that has a clear value that you can describe to yourself and have confidence in, so that as you go about executing it, you know what you have to do. And if you're not accomplishing what you have to do, it gives you a clue as what needs to be fixed, or maybe when you need to try something else.
All right, folks. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much, Jacob, Daryl, and Will, for joining us today.
Our pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Check back daily on our social media for updates on future webinars, and we hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.